had recently went through a pretty bad breakup and needed some space. I found walking alone took my mind off it. There was a really nice walk around 20 miles away from my house. It was on a hill, but had lots of open space. I used to live quite close when I was younger, so it felt quite nostalgic going back there. Rarely anybody would be there, and nobody knew me there either. It was a Saturday afternoon. I parked my car at the top of the hill. To the right of the footpath was a wooded area, which I would eventually end up in. While walking, I realised that I left my phone in the car, so I walked back to grab it. As I approached my car, I noticed all of my tyres had been slashed. I looked around, and I couldn't see anybody. I grabbed my phone, but I didn't have any signal. All 4 tyres had slash marks. I started to panic. Whoever did this intentionally. I walked away from my car and towards the road to try and get a signal. An old man in a wax coat walked towards me from the woods. I started to panic, thinking this was the man that slashed my tyres, but he was old and didn't take notice of me, and for some reason, I trusted him. I approached him and said my car tyres had been slashed. Do you have a phone I could borrow? He looked concerned and said, I do, but you won't get any signal up here. He then started asking me really weird questions. He said, are you alone? Does anybody know that you're up here? This creeped the hell out of me, so I just said it's fine. I'll walk my own way back and I'll try and get some signal. He said, don't be silly. Let me give you a lift to the nearest town. It's only a 5-minute drive away. I told him that I'm fine and I'm happy to walk. He then laughed and walked away from me. This man really creeped me out. I walked towards the nearest town. I could hear a car engine coming from the side of me. An old Land Rover Defender pulled out from a muddy track and came towards me. It was the man that I had just bumped into. He pulled up to the side of me. He said, I've just looked at your car. I don't know who did that, but I just saw a group of teenagers playing in the woods. It may have been them. Please, let me drive you to the nearest town. I still had no signal, and the nearest town was only a short 5-minute drive, so I reluctantly got into the Land Rover. The man drove really fast. Both hands were gripped on the steering wheel. Bloody kids, he said. I don't know what they get out of damaging other people's cars. This man was really strange, and what I found really odd about him is at the end of every sentence, he would laugh, like a nervous laughter. He suddenly turned right, driving away from the town. I said, you're going the wrong way. The town is that way. To that, he responded by gripping the steering wheel tighter. He turned and faced me and laughed at me. I remember looking back at him and thinking how much this man had changed from when I first initially bumped into him. His eyes were black. He kept driving really fast down this narrow track. The Land Rover had no seatbelts. I told him to stop, and he just kept laughing. I had to get out. I swung open the door and launched myself out and landing on the hedge at great speed. I quickly got to my feet and ran down the track. I didn't know what damage I had done to myself, but my arm was bleeding. I could hear the brakes of the Land Rover screeching along the muddy track. I saw an opening in the hedge. I ran through it as I could hear the Land Rover turning around. I hid underneath the long grass as the Land Rover slowly drove past me. The man shouted out of the window, I will find you. I could hear the handbrake lift up, and the man got out of the Land Rover. He kept laughing as he kicked the grass, but I was at least 30 feet away from him. Eventually, he got back in the Land Rover and drove off. I roughly knew the way to the town, and I knew that if I stuck to the fields, Then the creepy man couldn't find me. When I couldn't hear the car engine, I stood up and I ran through the grass as fast as I could, and I eventually got to a main road. I waved down a car, and the people inside were pretty freaked out. The man and the woman both got out of the car to make sure I was okay, and I told them what had happened. I didn't realise, but both my legs were covered in blood. The young couple lent me their phone so I could ring my parents. They offered to drive me home, but I was still freaked out, and so I asked them if they could wait with me until my parents arrived. My parents arrived, and I hugged them tight. The whole ordeal was horrible, and I was so glad that I got away alive. My car was later picked up in the afternoon, and I never went for a walk alone again. I hope you enjoyed today's video of the middle of nowhere horror story, and if you enjoy horror stories and would like to listen to more, please click on the next video.